Okay, here's another premise. There are no rich people in the world, and there are no poor people. There are just people. The rich may have lots of pieces of paper that many pretend are worth something, and the poor may not. The rich claim they own land, and the poor are denied the right to make the same claim. A primary purpose of the police is to enforce the delusions of those with lots of pieces of green paper. Those without the green papers generally buy into these delusions almost as quickly and completely as those with. These delusions carry with them extreme consequences in the real world. A couple things about that. One of them is, well, I guess it's one thing. At a talk I did last year, afterwards, this one guy said, you know, you talk a lot about violence and this culture being based on violence, but I don't see it. You know, I'm not a violent guy. And I said, okay, first off, where's your shirt made? He said, Bangladesh. I said, okay, do we even need to talk about that? I said, no. I said, next, do you pay rent? And he said, yes. I said, why do you pay rent? He said, because I don't own. I said, no. What would happen if you didn't pay rent? And he said, well, somebody would come and evict me. And I said, who? He said, well, the sheriff. I said, well, what would happen if when the sheriff came, you invited them into your house? And you said, would you like some dinner? And then after dinner, you said, you know, it's been nice having you, but you're really not all that pleasant, so I would like for you to leave now, and I'm going to go to bed. What would the sheriff do? He said, well, the sheriff would pull out a gun, and he would force me out of the home. And I said, I see. So what you're telling me is that if you don't pay rent, somebody with a gun is going to come and force you out of your home. So the reason you pay rent is because if you don't, somebody is going to do violence to you if you don't. And he said, okay, I get it. And I said, also, do you ever get hungry? He said, yeah. I said, well, when you get hungry, do you go to the grocery store? He said, yeah. And I said, well, do you start eating? There's lots of food there. And he said, no, I don't. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because if I do, then somebody with a gun will come and take me away. And I said, yeah, it's the same guy. He's a real asshole, isn't he? The point is, I think it's really weird that we have to actually pay to exist, to live on the planet. And we have to actually pay to eat. And if you don't, some asshole wearing a uniform is going to come with a gun and take you away. That's a really, really weird thing. Some bobo, sorry. Oh, here's a great premise. Oh, we're doing great. Here's a great premise. Love does not imply pacifism. You get this all the time. That, you know, if you love enough, then that means that you'll never do any act of violence. And well, first off, violence is just such a weird word. There should be like 135 words for violence because there's a bazillion different types of. Well, there should be a bazillion words for violence because there's a bazillion different types. I mean, it's one form of violence to rape and torture and mutilate and kill a child, and it's another form of violence entirely to step in and stop a person from doing that. And it's one form of violence to eat a carrot, and it's another form of violence to eat a cow, and it's another form of violence to, you know, there's all different, you can't use one word to describe all of them, but nonetheless, we're going to use that just like resource. We're going to condense it all for a second. Love doesn't imply pacifism. That a lot of people say if you just love enough that you would never do any act of violence. And I don't think that Mother Grizzly Bears would agree. I have a newspaper article above the space where I work that says, the headline is Mother Bear Charges Trains. And the trains had killed her 2 sons, and so she began to charge every train that came by. I grew up around animals, and I've lived around animals my whole life. And in my life, I have been attacked by mother horses, cows, chickens, hawks, eagles, hummingbirds, spiders, and mice who thought that I was attacking their children. And if a mother mouse is going to attack someone 6,000 times her size to protect those she loves, what's going on with us? She won, by the way. I think I'd like to read a couple things, and then I'd like to read 3 things, and we'll do Q&A. Part of the problem really is identification. That's a really central part. With what or whom do you identify? Where the mother mouse identified with herself and those she loved. And Oh, it's kind of like the other day. Somebody said to me, so how much longer do you think we're going to be in Iraq? And I said, I didn't know we were in Iraq. I thought we were in Northern California. And the friend said, it's like, Derrick, do I have to put up with this shit all the time? You know what I meant? How much longer do you think our soldiers are going to be in Iraq? And I said, they're not my soldiers. There's this great bumper sticker I saw, US out of North America. I really like that. So it's like, with whom do you identify? The attorney at that dinner was saying, if we can take over the White House, she's identifying with the Democrats. Once again, with whom or what do you identify? Do you identify with your own body? Do you identify with your land base? Do you identify, what are the things that are worth living for? What are the things that are worth dying for? What are the things that are worth fighting for? What are the things with whom and with what you identify? Anyway, so here's a little story about that. I go to the post office. Jim, my favorite clerk there, with whom I often chat as he processes the packages I'm mailing, comments on the heat. It's 85 or 86. He says, the second or third highest temperature on record here. I live in cool Northern California. It makes you think about global warming, he says. I nod, then reply, 19,000 people dead in Europe from the heat. The damn newspapers don't even mention global warming. I don't mention that this is more than 6 times the number killed in the attacks in the World Trade Center. Jim likes my politics, but polite discourse generally demands we ignore many obvious things. Now it's his turn to nod. He says, did you see those pictures of glaciers melting in Europe? The climate's changing, I say, and those in power won't do anything about it. The culture has too much momentum, he responds, and those in charge have too much money and power for us to stop them. That's why, I say, my next book is about how to take down civilization. He looks at me for a moment. You can write a book about it, but you can't make it happen. I can help push in the right direction at the right times. I think that can make a difference. It'll come down all right, he says, and that pretty soon, but it won't be your doing. It'll be the system collapsing in on itself. This is a guy at the post office. There are many who know this, but few who speak it out loud. I say, we can hurry it up. It's going to be nasty, he responds. It already is nasty, I say. That nastiness is exactly why I bought a gun, he said, a .38. I'm about to say that's also exactly why I bought a gun a few years ago, but he carries my packages to the big bins and back. When he returns, he says, it's for myself. I don't know what he means. He says, I don't want to live like that. I say, I don't want to live like this. He says, I don't want to live like an animal. I say, I got news for you, Jim. You already are an animal. He says, I need my electricity. I can't live without it. I don't say anything. I think, is it worth it to you? He looks me straight in the eyes and says, I'm going to retire in January. Don't do this right now. Give me a couple years to enjoy my retirement. Okay, 2 more things to read. I want to say a couple more things first. One of them is that the most common words I ever hear spoken by any environmentalist anywhere, we're fucked. We're so fucked. So several years ago, I got a call from a friend of mine one night saying, she's a long-time environmentalist, saying, this work is just killing me. It's so hard. It's really painful. I said, yeah, I know it is. Then she said, unless it stopped, the dominant culture is going to kill everything on the planet, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. She said, it has a death urge, doesn't it? I said, yeah, it does. She said, it hates everything, doesn't it? I said, yeah, it does, even itself. And then she said, we're not going to make it some great new glorious tomorrow, are we? And I thought a moment, and then I said the thing I knew was best to say all along, which is, I've been waiting for you to say that. And the reason I said that to her is because about 10 years ago, I was undergoing a similar collapse where I was just bursting into sobs several times a week. And I'd cry over the salmon, the grizzlies, so much. And a lot of my environmentalist friends were saying, Derrick, just back off because the problems will still be there when you come back. And I knew I couldn't do that. I knew if tears are going to mean anything, if you're not going to cry over the death of the salmon, what are you going to cry about? And so one day I called this friend of mine, Jeanette Armstrong, who's an Okanagan Indian writer, activist, and I said, this work's really hard. It's really painful. It's killing me. She said, yeah, I know it does that. And I said, we're not going to make it to some... No, I didn't say it first. I said, unless it stopped, the dominant culture is going to kill everything, isn't it? She said, yeah, it is. And I said, it has a death urge, doesn't it? She said, yeah, it does. And I said, it hates everything, doesn't it? She said, yeah, it does, even itself. And I said, we're not going to make some great new glorious tomorrow, are we? And she said the best thing she could possibly say, which is, I've been waiting for you to say that. And the reason that was the best thing she could say is because it normalized my despair. It let me know that despair is an appropriate response to a desperate situation. And it let me know that I could feel the pain and the sorrow, and it's just pain and sorrow. It's just pain, it's just sorrow. And it's not so much the pain and sorrow that hurts as it is my resistance to it. And it let me know that I could feel all of those things and it wouldn't kill me. Or even better, that it would kill me. And there's a wonderful thing about being dead, which is that once you're dead, they can't touch you anymore. You can still sing, and you can still dance, and you can still make love, and you can still fight like hell. But they can't touch you. The logic of the Nazis doesn't work on you anymore. And a question I get sometimes is, if things are so bad, why don't you just kill yourself? And the answer is that life is really, really good. I'm a complex enough being that I can hold in my heart the understanding that we're really fucked and that life's really, really good. And there's this strange notion that if you understand how bad things are, that you have to go around being miserable all the time. But I'm actually really happy. And I'm really sad. I'm really full of rage. I'm full of joy. I'm full of a lot of things. I mean, it's like this person sent me an email a while back saying she wanted to know how my anger at the dominant culture affects my sex life. And I was really tempted to write back, that's a question to which you will never know the answer. And what but I really thought about it, and it's based on the idea that if you're angry, that your anger has to be a shotgun. But surprisingly enough, if some specific person makes me angry, I can be angry at them. And if some specific thing makes me angry, I can be angry at it. That doesn't mean I have to be angry at you. I may be, goddammit. That we can separate. And the other question that I get a lot is, if things are so bad, why don't you just party? And the answer is, I don't really like parties. I'm actually having a wonderful time. There's this great Irish proverb: is this a private fight or can anybody enter? And that question about if things are so bad, why don't you just party, used to bother me a lot until I realized that the premise is, there we go again, that a premise of that question is that it really reveals nothing more nor less than an incapacity to love. Because if you love, you do what's appropriate to defend your beloved. And of course results matter to you, but they don't matter to whether you make the effort. I got this email from this guy not very long ago saying that his son is 15 years old and he's wonderfully active, working for social justice and ecological sanity and all those groovy things. And the problem is that he didn't know how to give his son hope, and he wanted his son to stay active. And I said, if you want your son to stay active, don't give him hope, give him love, and he'll stay active. Because hope, once again, is the whole powerless thing. So the other thing I want to read, there was a point to that story, I just don't remember what it was. I'm going to read this short. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but there's a couple lines here I really like. A wonderful thing happens when you give up on hope, which is that you realize you never needed it in the first place, kind of like a belief in a Christian heaven. You realize that giving up on hope didn't kill you nor even make you less effective. In fact, it made you more effective because you ceased relying on someone or something else to solve your problems. You ceased hoping your problems would somehow get solved through the magical assistance of God, the Great Mother, the Sierra Club, valiant tree sitters, brave salmon, or even the earth itself. And you just began doing what's necessary to solve the problems yourself. Okay, so that said,